For years, the world laughed when Donald Trump made jokes about Greenland. We laughed when he talked about buying islands or expanding the map. We treated it like the eccentric ramblings of a real estate developer who didn't understand how nations worked. But right now, looking at the data coming out of Washington and Ottawa, the laughter has stopped. The joke isn't a joke anymore. What we are witnessing right now, in real time, is not a trade war. It is not a diplomatic dispute. It is a foreclosure proceeding. The President of the United States has effectively placed a for sale sign on the second largest country on earth, and he has explicitly told us how he plans to acquire it. Last week, the mask slipped. In a conversation that was supposed to be about missile defense, about the so-called Golden Dome to protect North America, the proposition was made. It was blunt. It was transactional. It was terrifying. The offer was simple. If Canada cannot afford to pay for its own survival, if it cannot secure its own borders, if it cannot contribute to the shield, it should just join the Union. Trump said it plainly, become the 51st state, and you get the protection for free. Most major news outlets covered this as a headline about NATO spending or a rhetorical flourish. They missed the signal. They missed the fact that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment comment. It was the final phase of a strategy that has been building for 5 years. We need to look at the mechanics of what is happening because the timeline has accelerated. The Canadian government, led by Prime Minister Trudeau, is no longer dismissing this. In closed-door meetings with business leaders, meetings that were never meant to be public, Trudeau admitted that the threat is real. He told them that the American administration is actively looking at Canada not as an ally, but as a resource depot to be absorbed. The strategy is not military invasion. There will be no tanks rolling across the Ambassador Bridge. There will be no soldiers parachuting into Toronto. That is the old way of conquering a nation. The new way is cleaner, quieter, and far more effective. You don't conquer the land, you bankrupt the landlord, you crash the currency, you destroy the economy, and then you buy the assets for pennies on the dollar. This is where the story shifts from political drama to economic warfare. The weapon of choice is the tariff, but not in the way we usually understand it. Usually, tariffs are used to protect domestic industries. You tax foreign steel to help your own steel mills. But a 100% tariff on a country that sends 75% of its exports to you, that isn't protectionism. That is an execution. The moment those tariffs were threatened, the Canadian dollar, the loonie, didn't just dip. It began to look into the abyss. Analysts are already projecting a slide to 60 cents against the US dollar. Some dark horse economists are whispering about 50 cents. Think about what that means for a modern G7 nation. At 60 cents, Canada effectively ceases to function as a sovereign economic entity. It becomes a discount bin. Every Canadian company, every mine, every piece of real estate, every technological patent becomes instantly on sale for American buyers. And this is not accidental. This is the setup for the most aggressive hostile takeover in history. The United States has just launched Project Vault. This is a $12 billion strategic fund designed to seize control of critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths. The official press release says this money is to support American businesses. But look closer at the timing. You do not launch a massive fund to buy resources at the exact same moment you crash the price of the resources unless you are planning a shopping spree. Trump is creating a market crash in Canada on purpose. He is driving the valuation of Canadian mining giants into the ground so that Project Vault can step in and acquire the control rights. It is the same strategy used by private equity firms to strip distressed companies, only this time, the target company is a sovereign nation. The ultimate goal isn't just to buy the ore, it is to own the ground it comes from. We are watching a coordinated effort to transfer the wealth of the Canadian Shield into American hands, legal document by legal document, while the Canadian population is distracted by the price of groceries. The economic reality on the ground in Canada plays directly into this narrative. The country is already on recession watch. The GDP per capita is falling. Productivity is stagnant. The housing market, which has propped up the Canadian economy for a decade, is flattening out. The Canadian people are exhausted and their purchasing power is eroding every single day. Into this vacuum of hope, a new narrative is being injected. It is the narrative of liberation. Prominent voices in the American media ecosystem, including Tucker Carlson and key Trump allies, are reframing the destruction of the Canadian economy as a rescue mission. They are telling the Canadian public that their government is captured. They are saying that Ottawa is beholden to globalists and Chinese interests, and that the only way to save the Canadian family is to crash the current system and merge with the American engine. This is psychological warfare. It is designed to make the Canadian citizen look at their dissolving bank account and blame Ottawa, not Washington. It is designed to make the annexation of Canada feel not like a conquest, but like a relief. The argument is seductive. Why struggle with a 60-cent dollar and high taxes when you could join the US, double your salary, and lower your cost of living? It is a merger and acquisition pitch delivered to 38 million people. But the most dangerous aspect of this plan is how it bypasses the federal government entirely. The strategy is to fracture the country from within. We are seeing reports of a diplomatic fracture where Washington is effectively ignoring the Prime Minister and speaking directly to the provinces. This is the Alberta bypass. Alberta sits on the third largest oil reserves in the world. Its economy is entirely dependent on getting that energy to market. Trump knows this. His allies are reportedly signaling to Western Canadian leaders that there is a special deal on the table. The offer is insidious. If Alberta breaks with the federal climate policies, if they distance themselves from Ottawa, they could be granted a special trade zone exemption. They could be saved from the tariffs. This is effectively soliciting sedition. It is telling a province that if they act like the 51st state, they will be treated like one, while the rest of the country burns. It drives a wedge between the energy-rich West and the manufacturing-heavy East that might shatter the Confederation permanently. If Alberta cuts a separate deal to survive, the political entity known as Canada effectively ends. Then, there is the issue of defense, which serves as the leverage point for land. The rent is due doctrine has replaced the old alliance structure. For decades, the assumption was that America protects Canada because it is in America's interest. That assumption is dead. The new administration views defense as a service, and the bill is past due. The terrifying concept being floated is territorial leases. If the Canadian government cannot pay its NATO obligations, and with a collapsing currency, it certainly cannot, the suggestion is that they pay in real estate. We are talking about the Arctic. The Northwest Passage is becoming one of the most strategic waterways on the planet as the ice melts. China wants it. Russia wants it, and the United States has no intention of letting anyone else have it. But rather than fighting a war for it, the Trump administration is positioning itself to take it as collateral. They are framing it as joint security. They move the U.S. military into the northern archipelagos to secure the continent, and they never leave. It becomes a permanent lease. A sovereign nation that cannot control its own territory or pay for its own protection is not a sovereign nation. It is a protectorate. And we haven't even touched the most valuable asset of all. It isn't oil, it isn't lithium, it is water. The American Southwest is drying up, the aquifers are draining. The Great Lakes hold 20% of the world's surface fresh water. For decades, the Great Lakes Compact has protected that water from being siphoned off. But treaties are only as strong as the countries that sign them. If Canada is economically brought to its knees, if it is desperate for a trade lifeline, the price of admission to the American market might be the water. Trump's concept of reciprocal trade includes natural resources. The fear is that the renegotiation of trade deals will include a provision to treat water as a commodity. This is the liquidation scenario. It is the moment where a country is forced to sell its future to survive the present. The $12 billion Project Vault is just the down payment. The real currency being used to buy Canada is fear. Fear of poverty, fear of irrelevance, and fear of collapse. The American administration is betting that if they apply enough pressure, the Canadian public will eventually choose prosperity over sovereignty. They are betting that national identity has a price point, and they are trying to find it. The rhetoric has moved beyond negotiation tactics. When a leader says, "We don't need your product," and then immediately launches a fund to stockpile the very raw materials you produce, they are lying about the need, but telling the truth about the method. They don't need to buy the product at market rates. They plan to own the source. The critical mineral stockpile scheme is the logistical backbone of this takeover. By securing the supply chain through ownership rather than trade, the U.S. eliminates the risk of dealing with a foreign government. It turns the Canadian mining sector into a domestic American asset managed from Washington, dug up in Ontario. The recession watch reported by Rosenberg Research provides the perfect cover. With the Canadian economy already gasping for air, growing at a pathetic 1%, The resilience of the system is gone. There is no buffer. If the tariffs hit, the slide into depression will be immediate. This timing is not coincidental. Geopolitics is often about kicking the door down when the structure is already rotting. Trump sees a weak government, a divided population, and a fragile economy, and he sees an opportunity to consolidate the continent. We have to understand the scale of what is being proposed. This is the integration of the North American continent under a single dominant power structure, with the northern neighbor reduced to a resource colony. The 51st state line is not an invitation to equality. It is not about adding a star to the flag and giving Canadians seats in the Senate. It is a euphemism for absorption. It means the erasure of the border for capital and corporations, but the hardening of the border for people until they submit to the new rules. The pressure is being applied from all sides. On the trade front, the U.S. Trade Representative is demanding the dismantling of Canada's dairy protections and digital service laws. They are demanding that Canada stop favoring its own culture and its own farmers. They want the market wide open. On the drug front, the U.S. Vice President is accusing Canada of failing to stop fentanyl, setting up the justification for a harder border or even U.S. law enforcement operating on Canadian soil. On the defense front, the demand is for massive spending increases that Canada cannot afford, leading back to the territorial lease trap. It is a full spectrum squeeze. And what makes it so difficult to counter is that the Canadian government has very few cards left to play. They cannot win a trade war with a customer that buys everything they make. They cannot win a currency war when their dollar is backed by a shrinking economy. They are trapped in a cage that was built over decades of economic dependence. And now the tiger is inside the cage with them. The narrative of Project 51 is taking hold because it answers the anxieties of the moment with a brutal solution. For the American voter, it sounds like strength. It sounds like securing resources and locking down the border. For the Canadian voter, it is presented as an escape hatch from economic decline. But for the concept of the nation state, it is a death sentence. It implies that sovereignty is a luxury that only the rich can afford. As we watch the Canadian dollar twitch and fall, as we watch the announcements of new American strategic funds, we have to recognize the pattern. This is how empires expand in the modern age. They don't march in, they buy in. They wait for the target to be weak, they make the situation impossible, and then they offer a deal that cannot be refused. The for sale sign is up. The buyer is motivated, and the price is being driven down every single day. The question is no longer whether Donald Trump wants to buy Canada. The evidence is clear that the acquisition is the goal. The question is whether Canada has the will, the unity, and the economic strength to take itself off the market. Or are we watching the last days of a sovereign nation and the first days of a continental superstate where the map looks the same, but the power has shifted entirely to the south? The project vault billions are moving, the tariffs are looming, and the invitation to just join us is hanging in the air, waiting for an answer. This is not just a trade dispute. This is a battle for existence. And right now, the odds are not looking good for the North. This is the reality of the new geopolitical order. Power doesn't ask for permission. It creates conditions where permission is irrelevant. We are watching the rewriting of the North American contract. The outcome will decide the fate of millions of people, the control of trillions of dollars in resources, and the future of the Arctic. History is being made, not with a bang, but with a wire transfer and a tariff schedule. The squeeze is on.